What's going on, everybody? So right now I'm going to actually review all of the heroes. I've gotten a lot of requests to do this, so we are actually going to do this. I'm going to talk about each hero, sort of what their strengths and weaknesses are, and maybe a little bit about their superpowers, like which are the good ones and which are the not. We're actually going to do this just by going in. I guess I'll show you one deck for each hero, also the decks that I like using, and we will start with Green Shadow. So this is the Onion Beans deck. So this is actually the most unique deck that I'm showing you for Green Shadow. Green Shadow is Mega Grow and is Smarty. So the Mega Grow part is really the strength, and the Smarty is the weakness. I would say right now, probably in the meta, the Smarty class is the weakest class. It's a support class and not even that good of one. Usually, like the Guardian class or something like that was a better support class. But anyway, typically with Green Shadow decks, you do want to be playing tempo. So you really want to start off with a good play on turn 1. Lily of the Valley would be great on turn 2. You grow shrooms and things like that, Bananasaurus Rex, and really try to stay ahead of your opponent on the board. That's your typical Green Shadow deck. The struggle with Green Shadow always is removal, since Green Shadow really does not have any hard removal, just a card that says, destroy a zombie. So the two ways of getting removal with Green Shadow either is with one of your bouncing beans. This would be the jumping bean. For example, this will bounce a zombie off the board. It'll bounce it back into their hand, and the other really removal card for Green Shadow would be the Spring Bean, which is very similar. It just costs 3. It's a 3-cost trick, and it does bounce a zombie off the board. Now, that's one way of removing. If you happen to be building a freeze deck, which is really the second type of Green Shadow deck, so then you actually will have removal. You don't need any of your jumping or spring beans. It's, because you can just be running Winter Squash, which will destroy any zombie that's frozen, and then make sure you have 4 Jolly Hollies in that deck. The Jolly Hollies will free all the zombies next door, and that will actually, combined with the Winter Squash, really remove a lot of those big creatures off the board. Having big removal is very important in every deck. This is what you're looking at right now is probably the most unique and very specific to Green Shadow type of deck. This is the Onion Beans deck. I do have a YouTube video about this, so if you want to check out how this deck works, you can check that out. But this is basically controlling, then playing your Onion Rings, and then taking over the game after turn 5, after the Onion Rings has turned all of your guys into 4/4s. This is probably the most solid deck with Onion Rings. Now, weaknesses of Green Shadow are probably like the Brainy class, because on the one hand, the Brainy class, it does have rocket science, so it really can take out a lot of the Mega Grow cards that Green Shadow has. One of the strengths, ironically though, of Green Shadow is playing against the Brainy class and against any deck that has a lot of tricks in it, because Green Shadow is the only hero that has the combination of not only Black IP but also has Brainana and Sporticus, and these are all cards that work very, very well against tricks. You can see the Sporticus over here. Every time your opponent plays a trick, and the Brainana will prevent them from playing tricks entirely. So if the meta really would become decks that are very, very trick heavy, then Green Shadow really would be a great go-to. Let's look a little bit at Green Shadow's powers. Green Shadow's superpower, just for attacking 5 in the middle lane, is probably one of the weakest powers in the game, particularly on the plant side. The reason is because if you're playing against good heroes, they're not going to be putting important zombies in the middle lane. Usually this is just good for getting an easy 5 damage in, which is okay for a power, usually not that great. Usually you want your powers to help you increase your lead on the field, not just do straight damage to your opponent's face. Big Chill is a great power. It can really freeze a zombie, so if you have an equal plant and equal zombie across from each other, this will freeze the zombie, which will make your plant survive. It's like a whole plant worth of value in that way. It also makes you draw a card, which is just amazing, and it also works very well if you're building a Green Shadow freeze deck. I really like Big Chill, and Big and also is one of the best powers, actually superpowers of the game. Giving for just 1 cost, giving a plant +2/+2 can put you way ahead. It can make a plant, the difference between a plant dying to a zombie and that zombie surviving. If you're playing Biggin on it, sometimes the plant will get so much bigger than the zombie that instead the zombie will die and the plant will survive, which obviously makes a huge difference. Whirlwind is a little bit of removal. Again, it is a bounce. It's very unreliable. I find that Whirlwind usually is not that good, because in the late game that you're bouncing their big guys, usually they have several guys in the field, and in the early game, so you're bouncing maybe something that costs 1 or 2. Usually Whirlwind is not that great of a power. Alright, moving right along. Let's go Alright, let's go to one of the best heroes in the game, Wall Knight. And this is probably the best Wall Knight deck, so I'll show you this one. This is the Heal Flower deck. In my opinion, this is the best deck in the game, and Wall Knight, therefore, is the strongest hero in the game. Wall Knight, back in Set 1 was not very strong, but now in Set 2, he's just been given so many powerful cards that he's probably the best hero in the game right now. So the early game of this deck, particularly with Wall Knight, is very strong. You have Galactic Cactus and the Gravebusters and the Hot Date, which are very good early game removal. So in terms of removal, Wall Knight is definitely an expert. You do have Shamrockets that are possible. You also have Briar Rose, which will, if you set that up with a lot of flowers, it will be able to remove things. It's kind of important having some early game water removal just so you don't die to Toxic Waste Imp. That's why in most decks I would like to run a few Hot Dates or something like that. That's really a good way of dealing with those amphibious minions that drags them in. Wall Knight is also very strong against Gravestone decks. So with Gravebusters, are really adding a few Gravebusters, since the Gravestone zombie decks, like the sneaky decks, are really the strongest, probably some of the strongest zombie decks. It's really nice having a few Gravebusters. For the late game, let's say in this deck particular, and for Wall Knight in general, you're very often going to be going with your healing strategy. That's really all the solar heroes are very strong in terms of the healing strategy. Just check out what Heartachoke and the way it interacts with Venus Flytrap, Trap Planet, and the Astro Vera is obviously really, really strong. Happens to be Wall Knight when you're running a heal deck. You also have this little guy, which is the Poppin' Poppies. Not only is this a flower which works well with Briar Rose, but it's also going to heal. So this really actually works well with Briar Rose and with the Heartachoke as well. For the late game, sometimes in some decks, you do run Walnut Bowling, which is actually a very efficient way of destroying your opponents. Wall Knight really has like the whole package. He has great environments, great early game, great late game. Usually with Wall Knight, you're playing a control sort of deck. The one weakness maybe Wall Knight has is against trick-oriented decks, and that was really the one deck that I found can actually beat the healing Wall Knight decks, is like an OTK Valk, like a Brainstorm, where you're basically using your little minions to charge up your Valkyries as they die, and then you're coming in teleport Valkyrie, and that really prevents your opponent from healing because you're really doing most of the damage like all in one shot by teleporting a Valkyrie in. And Wall Knight really does not have any way to prevent trick decks. He does have Forget-Me-Nuts, which is not that good of a card, but really, he doesn't have any of the Black Eyed Peas or the Brainanas or anything like that. So if you want to, deal with Wall Knights, I would say go for trick-oriented decks. Now, Uncrackable doesn't really affect the board. It really just prevents damage. This is very good in control decks, though, because every once in a while, you can just play Uncrackable, stall for that one turn, which is really, really good. You know you won't die then, and then just really come in the next turn very, very strong. Sometimes that keeping you alive. So is Geyser. Geyser works very well in healing decks. It's the strongest healing card, I would say, in the game, except for maybe Astro Vera. And Nut Signal also stalls for time. It draws a card. And Bubble is probably the weakest of his powers. It is good if you're running Pecanolis or Health Nuts, that as they gain health, they also do more attack. But this can sometimes really be good at moving one of your cards over. And, it can also really protect Wall Knight from getting killed. Wall Knight is the complete package. If you haven't experienced the Wrath of Wall Knight, maybe check out my latest Wall Knight deck on YouTube. It's really, really good. Alright, next, Spadao. So, Spadao is actually a very unique hero. I guess I'll show you the control advantage. There's two ways, really, of playing Spadao. One way is to swarm the board early with a lot of mushrooms. That's probably the typical Spadao deck, and then you play Pine Clone and perhaps follow up with Molotov. You can also run, your environments that, like your Mushroom Grottos, that will give you that advantage. It's really nice being able to have a really quick strategy like Mushrooms and Pine Clones with Spadao, and also have this card, Gravebusters, because a lot of times one of the weaknesses, let's say, of Pine Clone decks, Lion Gravestones, like Lion Dancing Zombie is very good at dealing with stacked Pine Clones and stuff like that. The Guardian heroes have such an advantage, having Gravebuster and having Shamrocket, just as, Shamrocket is one of the most efficient removal cards in the game. The other way to play Spadao is like the deck that you're seeing over here, is playing control. Spadao has a lot of early game removal. Between Galactic Cactus and all the Kabloomy cards, this is like probably the best lineup of early game removal in the game. We also are running, Spikeweed Sector and Pear Cup. I mean, just the first few turns, you're really removing hard. Have a little healing and a lot of late game. And, you basically want to stall for time and then hit him with your late game. It's really nice in that sort of deck also to have those Gravebusters, because typically control plant decks struggle against gravestones unless you are a guardian hero and you have gravebusters. So a really excellent lineup of cards. Spadao, I think, is a very underrated hero, and he really has a lot of potential in terms of being a very, very strong hero in this game, both in terms of the offense. You can do offense with Dandelion King and Grapes of Wrath too, which might even be better than the deck that you see here. Dandelion King Grapes of Wrath is a great offensive strategy, or you can do it, early game with the Pine Clones, and you just play the meta, whichever one works better. Tater Toss is a very, very strong card. It obviously doesn't do anything to give you an advantage in terms of your offense, but being able to remove, doing 6 damage just for one sun is obviously like basically the most efficient removal in the game. In terms of single target removal for 1 cost. You obviously use that as a removal card. Every once in a while, you turn a Tater Tot, you play it, and then you play Pine Clone, you turn into a Pine Clone. And again, having your power turn into a 3/3 is quite good. So anyway, Bubble Up obviously is a very weak strategy. Stormfront is an interesting power in the fact that when you're running a deck with like mushrooms and pine clones and really swarming with a lot of creatures, that's when Stormfront is one of the best powers. Sometimes just on turn 3, playing like Buffshroom, buffing up all your mushrooms, and playing Stormfront can make the board just like really strong. It happens to be strong in that, but when you're playing Control Spadao, this is actually one thing that gives Spadao a huge disadvantage in terms of playing the control game. Because Stormfront really doesn't end up doing that much. You don't end up having a lot of minions, so you end up getting like +1/+1 on 1, maybe 2 minions, and it ends up being very inefficient and very circumstantial. Meteor Strike is one of the best powers again in the game, doing just 3 damage straight off to a minion for 1 sun is so efficient. It'll give you such an advantage, and the fact again these powers cost 1 it really gives you a huge advantage. Anyway, let's move right along. By the way, I'd like to mention right now that for the most part, the way that the powers are created, the superpowers are basically supposed to represent like a 3-cost card. You know that from like Tater Toss, let's say Spadao's super is, the actual Tater, if you would have it in your hand. If it gets bounced in your hand, it takes 3 sun to play it. So basically, their signature powers are going to be, they're trying to make that like be a 3-cost card, and the rest of them are supposed to be a 2-cost card. Now, there are a lot of exceptions. There definitely are some that are better, some that are worse. I would say Holoflora, really is like a 3-cost card. It's a very, very good card. It's like Flourish, which does cost 3. Time to Shine is also probably, if there was a card in this game on the plant side that would say do a bonus attack, I would say it would have to cost 3. So there are some that are better, some that are worse. Here's Grass Knuckles. Grass Knuckles is the hero I would suggest to any person who's starting off this game. If you really want to buy a hero that will get you very, very far, and you can make expensive decks and cheap decks alike with Grass Knuckles, I would say this is definitely the hero for you. Grass Knuckles typically is going to be a really strong tempo hero, which again means you're going to be starting off strong on turn 1, stronger play, on turn 2, grow it on turn 3. Every deck with Grass Knuckles basically should be running 4 copies of Lily of the Valley and 4 copies of Growshroom, where they really grow your board so fast. Bananasaurus Rex is also very, very good. There are, more budget ways of making this. If you do more Ps and you run Podfather instead of your let's say your Muscle Sprouts, and there actually is a way of making the deck like this. You can also run Plantern for the 3 slot if you really want to. So I would say that Grass Knuckles is again has very, very strong offense from the Megago class, and then the Guardian class gives it very good defense, particularly with these 2 cards, the Gravebuster, and these are really the only Guardian cards we have in this particular deck list, are Gravebuster and Shamrock. But that's all you need. You just need something that's going to be able to deal with those gravestones, and you need something that's going to be able to deal with big removal. The other thing you need is something to deal with the water lane. Now, you can run, instead of Bananasaurus Rex with Grass Knuckles, you can run Guacodiles. Guacodiles not only gives you a nice strong water lane minion that has 4 attack, but it also gives you a removal card, because of course when the Guac it dies, it will explode and do an additional 4 damage, so you can really stick that in front of just about any zombie and it will destroy that zombie, which is really good. If you don't have Bananasaurus Rex, that's definitely what I would suggest for the 4-cost card with Grass Knuckles in general. There are maybe other Grass Knuckles decks. We have tried in the past to do Grass Knuckles decks like that are control. Really, the way to play Grass Knuckles, though, is tempo with a deck like this or similar to it. In terms of water lane removal in this particular deck, I really do like running 3 copies of Sweet Pea. This will drag that zombie in. I think this card is actually better than Hot Date. It deals very well with Toxic Waste Imp, and not only that, but it can also really be a threat into itself, this 2-3. For example, if you have a Lily on the board and the only minion you have in your hand is the Sweet Pea, you can play that on Heights and that will become a 4-5, and that's really why I really have been favoring Sweet Peas over Hot Dates with Grass Knuckles. Anyway, we'll take a look at his powers. His super is like okay. If you're against like Infinity or something like this, you really would like to save this to really destroy a lot of minions on the ground at once. If you're against the type of zombie heroes that really swarm a lot of minions, sometimes this can be used also as a finisher, just to do tons of damage to the board, and really, it'll do 6 damage if there's no zombies on the board. Typically, you want to save this though, because they're going to be at a big disadvantage, unlike Green Shadow Super, where they can just not put an important zombie in the middle lane. This one, they're gonna, if they're going to be avoiding the ground lanes the whole game, that will give them a very big disadvantage, particularly now that environments are a thing. Anyway, for the late game, sometimes you run Potted Powerhouse, it's okay. Grass Knuckles, the other powers, though, are all really good. Holoflora, drawing you cards, again, just playing this on turn 1 gives you this automatic card advantage. This is really an overpowered card because the card that does this really costs 3, and most of these powers usually, the non-signature powers cost 2 again. Time to Shine is also one of the best finishers in the game. This can be used to remove a zombie off the field and keep one of your strong plants alive, but typically you want to save this to when you have like a really big plant on the field, to then use Time to Shine and try to use that as a finisher. Ruwal is also actually a very decent power. It will give extra health and protect a plant. So if you're playing the Mega Grow class, where you're basically growing these huge plants, being able to protect one from dying from a deadly minion or from just a strong zombie, well, sometimes this card will amount to the value of a very strong plant. So I think that's actually a very good power. He has some of the really, arguably the best lineup of powers on the whole plant side. Alright, here's Rose. What are the weaknesses of Grass Knuckles? Maybe I'll just talk about that quick. So again, if there's a hero with a lot of removal like Pogo Zombie and Rocket Science, those cards, the very efficient removal cards on the zombie side, are very good because usually you're growing like one plant that's very strong, and if you can just hard removal them off the board, that would be the strength. Grass Knuckles is quite good though against, again, zombies that are playing like with big Gargantuar, since he does have the Shamrocket, and also against Gravestone decks because you're usually running some Gravebusters in that. Anyway, we're going to move right on to Rose. So this is a ramp to the Dragon Fruit. So there is one thing, I didn't mention this when I was saying Wall Knight. One strategy of the Solar class is you can make a ramp deck, which is, with this card, really is the most useful ramp card. It gives you Sunflowers as themed Solar Winds, and that will give you not only extra sun every turn, but it'll help you get your... it'll actually create little sunflowers, which are very good with Briar Rose. You can even play, Solar Winds on 2, Briar Rose, and then on turn 3, because that sunflower will give you an extra sun that turn. You'll have 4 sun, which obviously playing a Briar Rose behind a sunflower is just amazing. It's automatically protected. So in this deck, usually with Rose, there's basically 2 types of Rose decks. One is the healing deck, like you see over here. This is sort of a ramp healing deck. Sometimes you can make more of an all-out healing deck. This also is sort of like a control deck to the Dragon Fruit. I found that ramping up and getting your Dragon Fruits early is definitely a good strategy with Rose. The other type of Rose, which is very strong, is a freeze deck, and I would say most times you see Rose in the meta nowadays, it is going to be a freeze deck. So you just run your Snowdrops, your Flowers, and you run, happens to be Cool Bean is something that the Smarty class was given against Gravestones. I did not mention this by Green Shadow, but it used to be the Smarty class was very weak against Gravestones. Now they have Cool Bean, it's very strong against Gravestones, and that's particularly good in a freeze deck. So I would say mostly go with a freeze deck, or you go with a control ramp deck, healing deck like you see over here. Let's look a little bit at Rose's powers. Now, Godify, in my opinion, is one of the worst powers in the game. It's very circumstantial. Sometimes, your opponent will just have a bunch of little cards on the board, in which case this is almost useless. It also only works on the zombie with the highest attack, and sometimes that's not the most dangerous zombie on the field. So it is circumstantial. Obviously, in the late game, if your opponent's playing a lot of Gargantuars, this becomes amazing because it really essentially removes one of their humongous cards off the board. So if you're against big zombies, this is obviously good. I would say this is one of the weakest in the game, and particularly because if you start with Godify in your starting hand, again, it can neutralize maybe a strong turn 1 or turn 2 play that your opponent does, but usually that's not a very good card. Transmogrify is actually better than Godify now, since it transforms a zombie into a random zombie that costs 1. It used to be the zombie could cost 1 or 2, which made Transmogrify like the worst power in the game. Now that it makes it 1, again, there are some good 1 cards like Leprechaun or like Cheese Cutter or stuff like that, but usually this will turn it into something useless enough, and it can be used on anything, so I think that's even a little better than Godify, ironically. Weed Whack is a great power. It subtracts -2/-2 from a zombie, which is a very efficient small removal card, especially for 1 cost. It actually does a lot. Usually you're trying to destroy a zombie with that. Sometimes you can just make it have just down to 1 attack. Big Chill, again, as I said before, is a great power. This is very useful in freeze decks. I would say Rose. Rose, you actually, because 2 of the powers, Godify and Transmogrify, are good at dealing with big zombies, you actually don't have to put as much hard removal in Rose. You notice, like, I'm not running any squash or anything in the particular deck that you're looking at here, which really we're relying on the Briar Rose for removal, and plus, you know, you don't need as much, but plus, if they put, like, say, a big water lane minion, it would be good to have Godify and Transmogrify, or you can use Briar Rose combined with the Spirus, which is fine. Anyway, let's just move right along here. Rose is the only hero, by the way, that can run Briar Rose and Spirus together, so this is really the only time Briar Rose can actually, you know, put flowers, or Mayflower, let's say, in the water lane, and that'll actually, you know, make you able to have some water lane removal. Alright, moving right along, Solar Flare. Solar Flare is another very good hero for you know, early game, for people who are beginners. You know, one of your picks is Solar Flare. I would urge you to get Solar Flare. I'm going to, I guess, show you a nice Pine Clone deck. Here's Molekale Ramp. Now, this is a deck I'm going to show you that really combines sort of the ramp strategy, which is getting more sun each turn, with Solar Winds, that's the only ramp card, with the Pine Clone Mushroom combo. So again, usually for the Kadlumi class, the strongest decks are going to be swarming with a lot of little guys, mushrooms, and you know, this card over here, the Electric Currents, is very high voltage current, is very good little guy because it puts a little guy in the field and also draws you cards, so it's never going to like waste cards in your hand. And you want to come in with Pine Clone, and if you have Molekales, maybe follow up. If you can, again, play Molekale on a group of Pine Clones, they're all going to cost 4, and you want to play the Molekale on them, on that, and then they're all going to be random 5-cost creatures, which is just amazing. Solar Flare, her powers are very early game removal. That's basically all of them. Sunburn, Weed Whack, as you can see, and the Scorched Earth all remove small minions. You know, you don't need a lot of more, you know, early game removal for Solar Flare. Usually, anyway, we run Berry Blast because it's an awesome card. More Spore, if you're running a Solar Flare deck that has Pine Clones in it, More Spore is amazing because this will make 2 extra Pine Clones for 1 sun if you play this on turn 5. If it's not in a control deck, More Spore is one of the worst powers. It just puts 2 little 1/1s on the board, so no one even cares. A lot of times in control decks with Solar Flare, which you can run control, just try to remove as much of things off the board and finish them off with your late game, like with Healing or like with Cornucopia. Sometimes I'll even run a couple of Pine Clones in that deck, together with Shroom for 2 and then with More Spore, just so More Spore doesn't go completely to waste, and Shroom for 2 can be a pretty good control card as well. So we have, let's say, for the late games, really need to concentrate on late game removal. That's why, particularly in Solar Flare decks, we run 3 squashes, just because none of their superpowers are going to remove something big off the board. One weakness of Solar Flare, it really has 2 weaknesses. Usually, if you're running like a mushroom deck, the Crazy class is very good at dealing with Solar Flare because of cards like Barrel of Deadbeards and Fireworks can really just, any field clear card like that can really just spray damage all over the board and take out all of your little mushrooms, does like 1 damage to everything on the board. Another weakness of Solar Flare, I'd say even a bigger weakness, are Gravestone decks. Solar Flare has absolutely no way of dealing with Gravestones efficiently, so the Sneaky class is very, very strong against Solar Flare, and just this weakness alone makes Solar Flare from maybe having been one of the best heroes in the game to actually being kind of a little bit subpar, just because Gravestone, again, decks with Line Dancing Zombie and Pogo Mix Up Gravedigger are very, very strong, and they're going to beat Solar Flare 90% of the time. And I think we are ready to move along. So again, you can play this type of deck with Solar Flare. You can also play a control deck where you lots of Berry Blast, lots of removal, you put lots of Squashes and maybe Briar Roses and stuff like that, and then kill them with the late game. Just another way of playing that card. Alright, so let's look at, I'll show you this Tempo Heal deck. This will sort of explain a little bit about Chompzilla's two different strategies. So again, Chompzilla has the Mega Grow class and the Solar class together. So the Mega Grow class is usually more of a healing, more of a tempo, where you're getting strong on turn 1. You're playing Lily on turn 2, Groshu on turn 3. Your basic tempo cards. I'm actually going to be getting rid of the Peapods in this deck just while I'm at it and putting in some Click Peas because they are better. We'll get rid of a Black-Eyed Pea, and we'll play a 4th Click Pea because they synergize. So basically, usually Chompzilla, you're going to be playing tempo like that, 1, 2, Lily, Groshu, stuff like that. Another way to play Chompzilla is maybe to control your opponent and really take over in the late game with your healing cards like your Heartichokes and your Astroveras and your Venus Flytrap planets. It happens to be Chompzilla is not a very strong control hero. Doesn't have a lot of cards in the early game that are good at removing your opponent's cards. The powers, I guess Super can sort of take out early game cards, but doesn't really have any cards that like deal damage. It's not like the Kabloomy heroes that have like Berry Blast or stuff like that. That's why usually with Chompzilla it's smarter to go tempo. Instead of relying on removing all of those cards, how about just put your own strong cards as fast as you can onto the board and really out-tempo your opponent. Chompzilla also just, again, requires some hard removal. You can't really rely on Devour in terms of really removing big zombies on the board, unless that's their only zombie, because it does remove the weakest zombie off the board, so it's good to have at least a couple of Squashes. You can run a deck like this that doesn't have the early game tempo. You just rely on your Briar Rose and your Flowers. I probably will make a deck like that soon and upload that to YouTube, and then just rely on the healing for the late game, or Cornucopia or something like that. You can also make a pure tempo deck without all the healing in it, and just we'll put in like more plant foods and finishers like that. That will be better than the healing strategy in certain ways. Chompzilla, the biggest weakness Chompzilla has usually is the water lane. Chompzilla has no amphibious minions and also has no good way of dealing with small minions in the water, like Toxic Waste in particular. You really need a good answer in every deck for Toxic Waste, in my opinion, because that's a card that combined with a bunch of imps can really take over the game. So the card that was actually recently added to Chompzilla that has made her so much better against cards, small amphibious cards like Toxic Waste Imp, is the Sweet Pea. This will be able to drag that little amphibious minion into the lane, and the Sweet Pea will be able to take it out. So always try to run at least 3 Sweet Peas in all of your Chompzilla decks, no matter what kind of deck, if it's a control deck or a tempo deck. Definitely run a few Sweet Peas in your deck in order to be able to deal with those pesky Toxic Waste Imps. So as I mentioned before, Holoflora is a great card. Again, it's just a 1-cost card that will give you a card advantage, which, if you're advanced in this game, card advantages are just so good. Geyser is, again, sometimes a very good power, sometimes not. That's one reason why I actually do like running a tempo heal deck, to really get more of an advantage from this card, Geyser. Again, the super heroes of powers are very important, because you're going to be getting them every single game. They account for, equal to many cards of a different, that you're actually putting in your deck, since these superpowers you get more often. So obviously combined with Heartichoke, Geyser is very good. Sometimes you can use it if you're in a tempo deck where you're growing your cards to be very big. Sometimes that Geyser can come and heal all your guys off on the board and really rejuvenate them and give them sort of a second win. Scorch is one of the worst powers in the game because it only works against ground minions and it doesn't affect them very much. It's only very good if your opponent has a lot of really weak guys like Fire Roosters or imposters or line dancing zombies on the ground, and very often they're able to play around that. So if you're of course against Chompzilla or Solar Flare who has the Scorched Earth, make sure you plan a little bit ahead and have that Heights lane available for your line dancing zombie to camp there, or your Fire Rooster, just so they don't get Scorched Earth. I would say Chamzilla has sort of weak powers. Devour, again, is probably one of the worst ones in the game. It kills like the smallest zombie on the field. I really actually don't like the way Devour works, but anyway, sometimes it's very useful if they have just one zombie on the field, I guess. Alright, moving right along. And we're gonna go on to Citron. Citron used to be one of the worst heroes in the game. And there's been so many good cards added, particularly to the Guardian class, but also to the Smarty class, that have made Citron very good. So, the Citron decks, they're very strong again against gravestones because they have like Spyrus and Gravebuster and Cool Bean that you know, freezes all the gravestones. So against gravestone decks, if that's the meta, Citron actually becomes like a very, very good option. There's several types of Citron decks. The one you're looking at right now is an amphibious deck, which this is probably the only amphibious deck that really performs very, very well, because the two main classes with the real strong amphibious cards on the plant side are the Guardian class and the Smarty, and those are the ones that Citron have. So in this particular deck, again, you kind of try to stick as many of these little guys, the little amphibious cards in the field. They start off weak, but you really want to try to buff them up with your Navy Bean. Happens to be that one of the keys in this particular deck is Snake Grass. Snake Grass works very, very well with Citron's powers. Citron has a lot of powers that prevent your guys from taking damage. I'll show you in a second. So if you wait till turn 5 to play Snake Grass, you know, you can play Snake Grass plus Citron Super or Protect, and that will actually protect it for that first turn, and then it'll spawn more Snake Grasses, and then perhaps you can really buff them all up with your Navy Beans that buffs all your amphibious minions. This is one way of playing Citron. I would say the other two main ways of playing Citron are Control Citron, where you're basically, again, just using a lot of removal cards, which he has very good. You know, you have Guacodiles, Pear Cubs, you have... You have, you know, very efficient early game removal cards and Gravebusters. He also has, you know, like, besides what you see here, Shamrockets, he can add even more Cool Beans to really remove everything they have off the field. And then you can sort of come in the late game with either your, you know, any of the late game that Citron has. They're all pretty good. I would say Walnut Bowling is probably one of the best late game he has. You can also use Great Zucchini, and you can also use the Dragons for your late game. Citron recently has gotten better in control decks because Citron used to not have healing. Now Poppin' Poppies actually gives you healing for Citron, which is great in control decks in case your opponent is able to damage you. You can really gain a lot of your health back so you don't die so quickly. This also kind of, the little buddies prevent your opponent from hitting you that turn sometimes. It works quite well with Citron's Superpower, which will protect those little buddies. The other thing that also might help Citron control your opponent is Bodyguard, which will make you sort of automatically block the next time, and this card right over here, the Doomshroom. So I would say avoid playing any bouncing cards with Citron, because his hard removal cards like Shamrock and Doomshroom are obviously going to be way better than Jumping Bean and Spring Bean. The last way of playing Citron is by playing Freeze. It happens to be Freeze decks with Citron with the Smarty class is not as good because he does not have Big Chill as one of his powers. That's why Freeze decks usually you're going to see with Rose and maybe Green Shadow, since they have Big Chill. And it really actually does make a big difference having that as one of your powers in terms of being Freeze decks, because again, your superpowers, they come up a lot. They're much more important than people realize. So again, these powers are very good at controlling Peel Shield and Root Wall. They will be on controlling and protecting your guys. So if you can get a lot of guys, this is another reason why Amphibious Citron works particularly well, because you're getting a lot of guys on the field, and then you protect them with your cards in very key places. The Nut Signal is also good at protecting your minions, so that's really what Citron is all about. These cards in Control Citron are actually almost useless, because usually, you know, these Peel Shield, let's say, is not really that good of a card, unless you're swarming the board with a lot of minions. And Control Citron, you're mostly just removing everything they have off the board. You end up not having a whole lot of minions to even play Peel Shield on. Transmogrify is a pretty efficient big removal card. This does account for a little bit of your big removal, so you don't have to be running that many Shamrockets or anything like that. You shouldn't be running 4 for sure, maybe 3, maybe, you know, if you need an extra card, a different card in your deck, you can even just run 2 Shamrockets, because you always have Transmogrify will sort of be your, you know, your third hard removal card. You can see in the deck that we're looking at here, we actually have no Shamrockets. We're running 2 Guacodiles, which again is another removal card. We're just running the 2 because we have Transmogrify. That's sort of like the 3, you know, you want basically at least 3 big removal cards in every deck. And, Pair Cubs, I guess, also can be used as a big removal card because they essentially do 6 damage to a zombie, over the course of a couple of turns. Anyway, let's move right along. Let's go to Nightcap. So for Nightcap, I will show you... I'll show you this Molekale deck. Alright, so this is going to get another, Kabloomy hero. The stronger class for Nightcap is the Kabloomy, and the weaker class is the Smarty. I know Smarty has Beans, and I'll show you a little bit how Beans maybe work particularly well with Nightcap, but Beans are not the strongest strategy in the game. They have a lot of weaknesses. They're very weak against Fireworks Zombie and stuff like that, so I would say the Kabloomy is the stronger class that he has. Now, I'm gonna actually start by looking at I'm gonna start looking at Nightcap's powers, because his powers really dictate the type of decks that you make. The type of deck you make with Nightcap is almost always going to be a mushroom based deck, is because his powers, 3 out of 4 of his powers, work amazing with mushroom decks and basically horrible with every other type of deck. The Mush Boom is a very good power, actually. Do 2 damage and make a decent 1-drop minion on the field. This is actually a lot of value to all the combination of the different things that it does. It gives you another guy in the field also, which you can turn to a Pine Clone, which is very strong. More Spore also, again, if you're running Buff Shrooms and Pine Clones and stuff in your deck, this is a great power. If not, this is a horrible power. So run Pine Clones and Mushrooms with Nightcap, seriously. Stormfront also is very good if you're running a mushroom-based deck with a lot of little guys, and with Pine Clones, if you're running just Control Nightcap, that used to be a thing a long time ago, this power is close to useless. Whirlwind is good at giving a little bit of hard removal, a little extra hard removal. Again, this is a weak and unreliable card. It's only bounces a random zombie, so it's hard to get that really one pesky, really strong zombie off the field that you need to. One weakness of Nightcap is big removal. It really doesn't have very strong big removal. The Kabloomy class is very good at small removal. It does have big removal cards like Sizzle, but Sizzle for costing 5. Sizzle maybe should be a card that costs 4. It is actually a very weak way of removing a zombie, and this doesn't even take out the biggest of cards like, Wannabe Hero or even like Defensive End. It's very weak against it. The early game removal, because you have Berry Blast and Banana Bombs and stuff like that, is actually quite good, especially if you're running Mushrooms with Punish Room. This actually will give you a lot of random 2 damages that can take out small minions like, Imp decks and things like that. That's actually really particularly one of the strengths of the Kabloomy class in general, and Nightcap is no exception. Now, you can try to play Control Nightcap, where you basically have a lot of removal cards in the early game. It happens to be Cool Bean would actually... I'm going to maybe make a deck like this soon. Cool Bean really helps against Gravestones, which, Nightcap, before Cool Bean came into the game, did not have any good answers to Gravestones. And then you finish them off with your strong Kabloomy finishers like Dandelion King, Grapes of Wrath. I think this is a viable strategy. I'm going to maybe try it again to see exactly how good it is. When you're playing Nightcap and you're playing really any mushroom deck, I just want to emphasize this again, because this is a really important strategy. Make sure you don't just put all of your little mushrooms on the board every single turn. Turn 1, shroom for 2, turn 2, maybe this, maybe just more mushrooms and more mushrooms. You got to be very careful if you're playing against any crazy hero because they have Fireworks Zombie, or any sneaky hero because they have Fire Roosters that can really destroy a lot of your little 1 health mushrooms, or even the Hardy class you can really get Weed Spray before you're able to play your Pine Clones. Usually, you're stalling for time, putting a little bit of minions on the field, waiting until you know your opponent is not going to be able to play that Weed Spray or be able to clear your field, and then put all the mushrooms, and wait to put your mushrooms on the board until you have a Pine Clone in your hand. Usually, I end up playing Pine Clone on 5 with one of the little cards like Shroom for 2 or like the High Voltage Current. It happens to be Beans actually work very well with the whole Pine Clone strategy, and that's why I do like running some Beans, just Admiral Navy Bean mostly, and the Bean counter. I do actually run some Jumping Beans also to add some removal for Nightcap. This really, again, doesn't have a lot of big removal, so you need to rely on either Jumping Bean or Spring Bean to remove things off the field. It happens to be these are very good. These can be used as a finisher after your Pine clones have done a lot of damage. Also, the Admiral Navy Bean is a nice, cheap water lane minion that can be very easily turned into Pine clones. But also, your bean counter will give you little Weenie Beanies, which isn't always so good. I know Weenie Beanie is OP, but still, Weenie Beanies are not that good. But they do give you little guys that after turn 4, you can then put those on the field with a Pine clone and turn them into 3/3s, which again is one of the best strategies in the game. Pine clone is still one of the best cards in the game. I would say that, you know, he's pretty decent against Gravestone decks. He's yeah, I said before, he's weak against very explosive decks. So that's Nightcap in a nutshell. One thing I would like to just add on for Nightcap is usually Nightcap freeze decks, even though he is the Smarty class, do not work very well because his powers really work more with mushrooms. They don't work with freeze. You know, his little more spore power will end up being useless in freeze decks. He does not have big chill. And even like, you know, making it rain adds 1/1 to all of your guys usually doesn't work that well with freeze decks. It's obviously much better with mushroom decks, so you're putting a lot more minions on the field. So, I guess second to last but not least, we are going to talk about Beta Caratina, even though I've never played as Beta Caratina before. Is Captain Combustible. Captain Combustible is one of the fastest heroes in terms of doing tons of damage early in the game to your opponent. I would say rather than going with a face deck, I would say go with a tempo deck. This is the deck list you see right here is one of the best decks in the game. Very strong turn 1 plays with Blooming Heart and the recent addition of Click Bees to the meta. Very strong turn 1 plays make a strong turn 2 play, particularly with Lily of the Valley. You do want to try to grow something on turn 3 with your Grow Shroom and Bananasaurus Rex and use bonus attacks for finish. And you just like grow very, very fast. You do tons of damage, and his superpowers are very, very good at finishing off your opponent. Not only can you use like Blazing Bark together with Time to Shine or with Plant Food to be able to buff up a guy really, really strong and then do a bonus attack, which will very often be the way that you kill your opponent with Captain Combustible. His powers also work very, very well with Repeat Moss. This is basically the only hero I run Repeat Moss with. He's not really that good with other heroes. Maybe Grass Knuckles. I really don't really run him in Grass Knuckles decks. The Repeat Moss is, again, whenever you play a trick, this does a bonus attack, so everyone knows about playing Repeat Moss on turn 5 with his super makes it like do a bonus attack of 6, and if you even have 1 extra sun that turn, you can then play Time to Shine, and then it'll end up doing 2 huge bonus attacks of 6 each, and everyone knows how Captain Combustible is very good at growing these little Repeat Mosses very strong and then just doing tons of damage, you know, in the game. Meteor Strike is a very efficient removal card. Really nice to have this Captain Combustible. Captain Combustible has some of the best powers in the game. Meteor Strike, Time to Shine, and Biggin, I would say, are basically the 3 best plant cards in the game. Blazing Bark is circumstantial, but again, if you're using this as a finisher with Repeat Moss or together with a bonus attack, is also in those circumstances the best power in the game. So Captain Combustible, if you want to grow ranks in this game, I would say make Captain Combustible decks. You know, they win very, very fast, very often, and they're not that difficult to play and not super expensive. Having Bananasaurus Rex is probably the most important expensive card you can replace the Muscle Sprouts, perhaps, let's say, with the Podfather or something like that, if you don't have them. Captain Combustible really is sort of a unilateral hero. You're basically always making only tempo decks. There's really not that much potential in controlling with Captain Combustible, just because his late game, again, you can play with Dandelion King and with Grapes of Wrath, but then his powers really become useless. Trying to grow cards or Blazing Bark really becomes like a useless power. I would say really try to stick to the guns with Captain Combustible. The main weakness to Captain Combustible is Gravestone decks. Gravestone decks, particularly if you can put a lot of Gravestones and then put mixed up Gravedigger. He has no way of destroying the Gravestones. The Pogo Zombies are going to be bouncing all of your minions off the field. So again, any deck that has good removal like Pogo or like Rocket Science is very strong against Captain Combustible. I would say that weakness really to the Gravestone and to the removal decks alone really probably make the difference with Captain Combustible between being like the absolute best hero in the game or just being a good hero, which he is a very good hero in this game. Alright, let's move right along. Now, I'm going to now go to a hero that I actually do not even own yet. I did buy one of the multi-packs when Beta Caratina came out. I did not get Beta Giratina from that pack and I didn't buy them, I'm almost positive Beta Giratina will be available to purchase, let's say with gems or something like this directly later on. That obviously has not happened yet, but we're gonna get this. So obviously Beta Giratina is very similar to Citron. I don't think it's as good when it comes to amphibious decks because she does not have all the protecting powers. Let's see if we can just get into Beta Giratina's powers for a second. It doesn't have really all the protecting powers Citron has more powers that give you little strong guys. I think when I get Beta Giratina, I'm going to be maybe I'll try amphibious decks, but it could be I'll also try just like decks that really swarm quickly on the field. Does have some card draw, which is good for little swarmy decks. Also has, again, cards that give you little strong guys. Genetic amplification is, I think, a little bit overrated. It doesn't actually give you that minion right away. You got to spend this in order to get a minion that is basically increased a little bit. I really don't think her powers are that good. And again, this Insane Uproot, whatever it's called, this is an okay power. It does give you, it's a one cost 2/2 minion that moves a zombie. It definitely is very useful sometimes. It is very circumstantial. You know, it doesn't give you that much of an advantage. Keratin, again, gives you a 2/1 team-up guy on the field. It will draw you a card conjure route. Some routes are very good, some are not. It's unreliable. And even the one where you're drawing tricks, sometimes these tricks are going to be amazing, sometimes they're going to be horrible. I don't really know Beta Giratina just because of her powers. I really don't know how great of a hero Beta Giratina is. I'll obviously know that much better. Obviously, I'll know that much better when when Beta Giratina comes out. I'll buy Beta Giratina and then, you know, play around with her and see what are the best Beta Giratina decks we can make. Alright guys, so that is the plants, and I'm going to move right on to the zombies. So we're going to move right on to Super Brains. Here's the zombie heroes. We'll do them one at a time. So Super Brains actually controls arguably the two strongest classes on the zombie side, which are the sneaky class and the brainy class. The strengths of the sneaky class is just the really strong gravestone cards. I mean, just such a great lineup. If I had to make a zombie deck with only one class, it would probably be the sneaky, just because the sneaky has everything. It has thank you one time for the subscribing, really appreciate that. Anyway, the sneaky class has like a great lineup: small removal, fire roosters added to the game, line dancing zombie, and pogo mix of gravedigger. Notoriously, it's just one of the best combos period in this game. The pogos really are good at removing cards. This does count as your hard removal card, so with Super Brains I almost will never run Rocket Science with Super Brains. In this particular deck we're running backyard bounces because you're trying to mill your opponent, which makes them have 10 cards. Maybe I'll explain that a little bit later. But running pogos, you bounce them off the board. Mix of gravediggers makes the pogos go back into the gravestones and bounce them again. That really helps you control your opponent to the late game, where you can start putting your sharks and your plankwalkers. They're very, very strong finishers. Shark is a very underrated card. It's very good, particularly if you're running fire roosters in your deck. And plankwalker, again, just fills the board with really, it's a huge minion itself and puts two big minions, especially now that there are some very new awesome pirates in the game like Intergalactic Warlord. This particular deck that you're seeing with Super Brains is basically a control deck. You're bouncing everything off the board, all the little guys you're trying to get with your rooster and with your line dancing zombie, which even though he doesn't have any tricks that's field clear, because of fire rooster and line dancing zombie, it sort of is like field clear because he can take out team ups and stuff like that. In the early game, usually you're going to be running some kinds of imps, which, you know, again, imposter or leprechaun imp. I would say imposter is probably even better than leprechaun imp, or just toxic waste imp are very, very good early game. In the late game, again, you're just running your pogo mix of gravedigger, shark, and plankwalker. For environments, this deck, actually the one you're looking at right now, has no environments. This is actually a set 1 deck. This was probably even made before before imposter was the thing. That's why I just know imposters. Usually your environments in this deck are usually going to be either in the form of nebulas. You can make very strong ramp decks. You can check out on YouTube. I've been putting out in the past a lot of ramp decks with, you know, huge Giganticus. I haven't done it with Super Brains yet, but I probably will sometime in the future. You can also instead just run, for the sneaky heroes, instead of running environments, you can just run the Trapper. The Trapper will create an environment, and if you stick this back into a gravestone with the mix of Gravedigger, it'll actually pop out and make yet another environment. I would say try to stay away from making science decks in general. The science decks are not that strong. There are some that are good. Sometimes you really can use the science cards like interdimensional zombie as a ramp situation. Just check. I can't really explain that right now, but you can really ramp up using interdimensional zombie and science cards. I would say this type of deck is actually good. One of the decks that Super Brains and is actually better than basically any hero at is actually the mill deck. Mill decks, you fill your opponent's cards with hands with their hand with cards with the regifting zombie, and then bouncing everything off. They play off the field and back into their hand. And when your opponent has 10 cards, they can't block, and that will give you a very huge advantage if you're hitting them, and their block meter fills up and they won't block. Let's look at Super Brain's powers. So Super Brain has, again, a very interesting lineup of powers that are actually very strong. Carried Away sometimes is the best power in the game, because this can make one of your really strong cards do like move lanes and do a bonus attack. This can be used as a removal, but usually you want to use this as a finisher. Sometimes Carried Away is not that good if you don't have a particularly good minion on the field. It's basically useless. Telepathy is one of the best powers in the game. It gives you that card advantage. It also gives you 2 cards that are in your deck. Rather than, let's say, random cards, which is obviously a lot better because those cards will synergize with your hand and with everything. Super Stench, again, is circumstantial. Sometimes this can really get you back into the game. If you put a lot of little minions, especially imps and stuff like that, on the field, using Super Stench can just remove so many plans by giving all your zombies deadly. It does draw you a card too, which makes it even better, and cut down to size. Again, it's one of the weaker powers in the game because it only works, obviously, if you have a plant on the field with 5 or more attack. But if you're against the Mega Grow class, let's say, this would be very, very good because it'll just really efficiently destroy a huge, huge plant off the field. So, Super Brain's weaknesses, again, are against the Guardian class that has Gravebusters, also the Smarty class if they're running Cool Bean. It's very good at taking out the Gravestones, and really, for the most of the sneaky heroes, Gravestones is where it's at with the Pogo, mix of Gravedigger, Line Dancing Zombie, stuff like that. So those are the weaknesses. He's very smart, very strong against the Mega Grow class because he's able to bounce really everything the Mega Grow class has off the board with your Pogos, mix of Gravediggers. And alright, let's just move right along. Happens to be, even though he's controlling the Brainy class, a lot of the Brainy heroes I'm going to show you actually thrive very much on tricks. And Super Brain, since the Sneaky class doesn't have that good of tricks that are cheap, he has like Smoke Bomb, which is a very bad card, and Frozen Mustache is a very slow card. It doesn't have all the small tricks, so usually you're not going to make Trickster decks so much with Super Brains. There is one we tried last season. Maybe I'll try to bring that back. But Trickster decks with the Brainy class are usually going to be better with the other 3 Brainy heroes, and much less so with Super Brains. Anyway, let's move on to Infinity. Again, the strength of the Sneaky class is so strong. You can start off, this is basically, again, an almost completely sneaky deck. You want to start off with your imps. These really are all the 3 imps you need. You also have an imp power, like triple threat. This power is, in my opinion, the best one in the game. Not only does it give you 2 minions, this costs 1, it gives you 2 decently strong minions, and if you're following that up with, like, say, Toxic Waste Imp or with Imp Commander, it is so hard for most opponents to be able to deal with it. You're going to be drawing cards, you're going to have deadly minions on the field, and it's so hard to take out Infinity's powers. Now, the one weakness that Infinity's powers do have is a nice Guardian card. That's a really great removal card. It is a 1-cost card. It's called Galactic Cactus. It is a 1-cost, 2 attack, 2 level bullseye, that when it dies, it explodes and does 1 damage to everything on the field, and that is very, very good at taking out the extra Infinity clones from triple threat. So that's really the weakness of Infinity. Just in general, usually end up having a lot of weaker guys like Toxic Waste Imp, Fire Rooster, a Line Dancing Zombie. So the the Guardian class, let's say with that, or the Kabloomy class, that also can has a lot of little tricks that do damage, like Berry Blast, Banana Bomb, and Punish Room, are usually very good at dealing with the early game of Infinity. Of course, the strength here, Pogo mix of Gravedigger, one of the best combos in the game. Just keep on bouncing their minions off the field while putting huge minions of your own on the field. I do like in this deck, again, Infinity's environments are pretty weak. I know some people love Laser-Based Alpha. Moon-Based Alpha I haven't really tried a lot. I'm going to maybe try to use that more in the future, but I would say the best environmental card Infinity has in general is going to be Trapper Zombie, especially if you have 4 mix of Gravediggers in a deck like this. You definitely, he'll make an environment, he'll go back in a Gravestone, pop out, make another environment. Infinity has great late game. So you have the Shark. We're not running Mixed Up Gravedigger in this particular deck that you see. We are running, 3 copies of Binary Stars. Binary Stars, after you have like a full field, can really end up doing a lot. It does double the damage from your Trapper Zombies. By the way, Trapper Zombies, a little Trapper territory that does 1 damage to the plant that's there at the beginning of the turn. Does work very well with the Shark. The Shark, of course, will then destroy that zombie. Shark works well with Rooster. In this particular deck list, you see 4 copies of K-Explosion. I was just kind of making this deck as an experiment against Briar Rose decks. We were trying to use it. It says Disco Naughty as the title, but we used to be running Disco Knots in this deck. You really don't need to run Disco Knots. This is the deck you see here is probably one of the best lineups. Instead of the cakes, you can just run Wrath or Plumber or Final Mission, even just whatever the meta is telling you. Sometimes against some, if there's a lot of mushroom decks, it would be better instead of this early game to actually run instead of the imps to be running Barrel of Deadbeard's Fireworks combo, which is going to be very, very good at doing tons of little damage to those little mushrooms. So back when everyone was playing mushroom decks, Infinity was a very strong hero in terms of having Barrel of Deadbeard's Fireworks. Plus, there's a little secret that if you use the Super Stench power on a Barrel of Deadbeard's, when it explodes, it will actually kill everything on the field, plant and zombie alike, because it's doing 1 damage to everything and it has Deadly. So in terms of his powers, again, Super Stench is circumstantial. Sometimes it's very good. Brute Strength is not that good of a power. It adds 3 strength to a zombie. Sometimes that'll help you win the game, but if not, it doesn't necessarily affect the field that much. Usually that Brute Strength, whatever zombie used Brute Strength, they'll just do a little bit of small removal to it, and it doesn't increase that zombie's health. Getting, let's say, 2 attack and 2 health is much better than getting 3 attack, because it actually helps the zombie not only be stronger, but also live. Also, Encrypted, it's not a very good card. It does work very well with cards like Pogo or like Trapper, Trapper Zombie, that will, if the zombie has a active ability like Pogo that it bounces a card, when it goes into the gravestone and pops back out, it will bounce another one. Just draw you a card too. Very circumstantial card, but it's really actually one of the weakest powers in the game. Anyway, Infinity is a great hero. It has great early game removal, great late game removal, and great finishers like Planeswalker. So Infinity is definitely a hero that I suggest to early game players. When you're faced with your heroes you can pick in the game, you're obviously granted Super Brains. The next 2 heroes that you pick, which should definitely be Smash and then Infinity, and use Infinity, with chickening, with all the, in all levels of the game. Infinity is really one of the best heroes. Alright, here's Electric Boogaloo. So, Electric Boogaloo, we have experimented in the past using Electric Boogaloo as a tempo hero. Really, Electric Boogaloo is all about control. He has some of the best, most solid lineup of removal in the game. You do have Plumber, then you have Barrel of Deadbeard's Fireworks, and and these environments that will basically remove all the small cards off the board. Then you have a huge lineup of big removal cards with the Beastie class. It's actually very good to follow that up. You have Tentacles and Piano. Actually, does work very well in this deck because usually you're removing all of their minions off the field, so Piano is usually just going to be faced with a single plant. If you play this deck correctly, that will happen. And Locust Swarm, and then you just have the late game. The late game of Boogaloo is not that good. Again, these cards are very overrated. Even the new 11 cost Guard Feast is not. You have to survive for a long time, especially in today's meta. Most of the plant decks, the really strong plant decks, are going to be able to finish you off before turn 11, so we're just running a couple of those just in case. But Nursegar, again, Octo Zombie has become better. It's not like OP, it's not amazing. I wouldn't even say it's one of the best legendaries in the game, but it will get the job done in this deck in terms of finishing off your opponent as you remove everything they have off the field. Let's look at Boogaloo's powers. Boogaloo is very good, again, at removing things off the board early. He has 2 different Lightning Bolt powers that do 3 damage. This one heals you, this one doesn't. Obviously, the one that heals you is a little better, but these are really good, again, at taking off those small to sort of mid-range plants. Dance Off is a horrible ability. It is so bad, it's not even as good as the plant one that gives you mushrooms, because at least those mushrooms can be buffed or turned into pine clones. There's very little to do with these little backup dancers. I have seen people run just like, they'll run Maniacal Laugh, which gives a zombie 5/5/5 frenzy, just to be able to use it on the dance off when you get it. Evaporate is also one of the worst powers in the game. You definitely don't want to start off with Evaporate because it's very bad in the early game. In the late game, against big plants that can get damaged a little bit and then you evaporate them, it works particularly well with cards like Plumber or like Fireworks Zombie or Barrel of Deadbeards, because you just do that one little damage to them, then Evaporate will not only destroy the zombie, but will also draw you a card. So if you can actually do a little damage to a zombie, Evaporate is good, but again, it's very circumstantial, and it's one of the worst powers in the game. Alright, I would say Boogaloo, again, is not one of the strongest heroes. It happens to be there's a lot of plant decks that can really kill you quickly, like Grass Knuckles, and, you know, even Wall Knight is probably faster than this deck and has a lot of good things against, like, late-game zombies. I would say Boogaloo works best as a control hero, but really is not that good. And now we're coming to Professor Brainstorm, and I don't even know which deck to do. I'm going to show you, just for the sake of showing you several of Brainstorm's amazing decks, and Brainstorm has one of the heroes in the game that has, like, so many possibilities. I'm going to show you the OTK Pay-to-Win hybrid. So there's basically two ways of playing Brainstorm. The most typical way is what we call Professor Pay-to-Win, is by running Tricksters and then a bunch of removal cards, particularly Tricks. Those will buff up your Tricksters. You get them, you draw a lot of cards with Brainstorm, and you teleport these Tricksters in, and they take over the game. The other way, which is a deck that was really promoted a lot by a streamer named Tryhard, is the OTK Valk deck. OTK stands for One Turn Kill. And thank you so much, Stinky Troll, for the sub.
Yay!
Yay! Basically you put lots of little minions on the field, and as those minions die, those Valkyries in your hand will start getting stronger and stronger, and then you can teleport one of the Valkyries in and do this huge attack of, 10, 15, sometimes even 20 damage, combined with bonus attacks. Usually can finish off your opponent all in one shot. Two very good strategies that I actually I prefer to combine, so you have a lot of late game different options. Just in case you don't get your Valkyries, you still have your Tricksters, and in case you don't get your Tricksters, you still can go with your Valkyries. This is a deck that works very, very well. Brainstorm. Brainstorm doesn't run out of cards very easily too, which really makes the late game, the Valkyrie or the your late game, you really can play very, very low curve. You notice really most of the cards in this deck just cost 1, 2, or 3, and then really besides for the Tricksters. Cake I usually don't run in this deck. Again, I was making this as an experiment to kill Briar Rose. The Cake Explosions, I think this card, the Final Mission, is actually better than Cake Explosion at that. Anyway, because Brainstorm has powers that just draw you a bunch of cards. Eureka draws you 3 random cards, and Telepathy draws you 2 cards in your deck. It happens to be, in my opinion, I believe Telepathy is actually a better power than Professor Brainstorm Super. Even though it draws you 1 fewer cards, the fact that those 2 cards are in your deck, they're the ones that you selected and really synergize well with your whole deck. It's a lot better to get 2 cards that are going to be good than 3 random cards. Usually when you play Eureka, there's at least 1, usually even 2 of the cards are just useless pieces of garbage, or they're good cards that don't really connect to your deck at all. So Eureka is actually not one of the best powers in the game. Some people love Eureka. It does give you a 2-card advantage, but again, you can have a lot of more cards than your opponent. If the cards don't work well with your deck, it's not going to really give you that much of an advantage. Summoning is a very good trick. Make 2 or less. He used to have a great lineup of powers. It used to be, instead of Dance Off, he had the Lightning Bolt. Of course, this was given to Z-Mag, who had the worst powers, and now he was given the worst power in the game, which is Dance Off. This is very, very bad power, Dance Off. It is a little bit better in a deck where you're running Valkyrie, because the Valkyrie, again, every time one of your guys dies, including these little dance-off zombies, the Valkyrie will grow, so it is good in that deck, but otherwise dance-off is a very bad power, and it's good they gave Brainstorm dance-off, because otherwise his powers were actually used to be the best in the game, besides for being a great hero himself. Besides for these strategies, there are other things you can do with Brainstorm. We have been experimenting with a lot of ramp decks. There also is kitchen sink zombies, since he's a brainy hero. There are really a lot of things you can do with Brainstorm. I'm sure there's a lot of possibilities I haven't even thought of, but these are probably the 2 main ones, either a Trickster deck, a Valkyrie deck, or, like I like to do it, a combination of the 2. It becomes more reliable that way. Alright, moving on. Without further ado, finally we're getting to the hero that you all want to hear about. What about Z-Mag Fry? Is Z-Mag any good? What can be done to save Z-Mag? Z-Mag actually has become a lot better just in the last few weeks, because the sports strategy, the Hardy class in general, has become a lot better since the team mascot has been given extra health and the sports coach has been given an extra attack. It really improves Z-Mag a lot. Z-Mag is a small removal specialist. He has, all the small removal cards you really want in the game. Besides for Final Mission, he has Plumber, he has Rolling Stone, he has, the Barrel of Deadbeard's Fireworks combo, which is really good at removing small cards. He has both Weed Spray and Shakening, very good at removing small cards. The big problem that has always been with Z-Mech is he has very little cards that can remove big things. He has no hard removal cards. If you're playing against any plant deck like the Mega Grow class that can grow plants big, which almost every plant deck is going to do that in some way or another, playing big plants or growing small plants to be very big, he has just no way of dealing with them. The most damage he can do maybe is with exploding him, but again, putting this after the next turn, playing this against a plant, this can get grave busted, or the plant can be protected in one way or another, or a team up can be placed in front. And exploding imp is a very inefficient way of removing big plants off the field. You also have like Cake Explosion that only does 4 damage. It's very inefficient. There is one way of getting hard removal with Z-Mech, is by playing Stupid Cupid together with Rolling Stone. Stupid Cupid will nerf the plant, that turn having 0 attack, and then you can play Rolling Stone, which will destroy a plant with 2 or less attack. We have tried this a lot in the past, and it is not effective. The fact that in order to remove a big plant, you need a specific combination of 2 cards in your deck, or maybe Weed Spray, if that counts, is obvious. On that many brains, you need at least 5 or 7 brains if you're using with Weed Spray. It's just so inefficient. It's so bad, and Stupid Cupid in general is not a very good card. So right now with Z-Mech, the way you gotta do it is by finishing off your opponent very fast. It happens to be Quasar. Sometimes the little superpowers that Quasar gives you will give you some removal cards. Every once in a while you'll get Chop or Deadly or something like that will be able to remove things off the field. But really, Z-Mech, that is the weakness, and if Z-Mech would please get a card that costs 3 and remove big plants, let's say a plant that has 5 or more health, I would love to see that card implemented into the game. It would actually make so many more possibilities for heroes like the Z-Mech and like the Smash. We'll get to him a little bit later, so I would love to see that happen. We'll take a little look at Z-Mech's powers. Z-Mech really has 2 of the best powers in the game. Missile Madness might be one of the best ones in the game. Not only does it do that huge shot of 3 damage to a zombie, which the 3 damage tricks are, some of the best superpowers, it also does splash damage. I mean, this does like a lot. This is a very, very effective card. Electro Bolt is also one of the best ones in the game. Rockwall and Brute Strength, they're sort of circumstantial. I really do like Galvanize better. That increases both the strength and the health of a zombie. This one just does strength. This one just does health. Sometimes Brute Strength and Rockwall are very good. It depends on the situation. But Z-Mech definitely needs some hard removal. The obvious weakness of Z-Mech, as I said before, the weakness is going to be just big plants or the Mega Grow class that grows your small plants, and he has absolutely no way of dealing with that. And it makes Z-Mech a really unreliable hero in terms of a win percentage. Alright, here we go. We're going to move on to the Smash. The Smash, again, is one of the weaker heroes in the game. He controls arguably the 2 weakest zombie classes, which are the Beastie and Hardy class. Maybe the Crazy would probably be the other one, so that's why really Smash and Z-Mech are really the 2 worst heroes in the game on the highest level. Of course, the Smash has become bigger and better with the sports cards becoming good, so this is why we're running them in this particular deck. Interdimensional Zombie, I didn't mention in Z-Mech, is very good at buffing all the sports cards. This particular deck, we tried to run King. It worked pretty well and going viral. Now, it happens to be when you're running sports deck, Synchronized Swimmer, especially if you're running all these growing cards like Intergalactic Warlord, is very good. Not only is it a sports card, it can copy your big cards after they get buffed by the various things in this deck. The Smash has a pretty good lineup of powers. Now, slamming Smackdown, I would say, after Infinity's power, is probably the best power in the game. This is such an effective removal card. Remove a plant with 4 or less attack, which is most plant cards it's going to be able to remove. I mean, this is really, really great value. I love slamming Smackdown. Galvanize also is a very strong card. +2 attack, +2 health. It really just upgrades a plant like 2 levels, which is just so good, Galvanize. Possessed is very circumstantial. It's not really one of the best cards in the game. It basically protects your card a little bit and gives it frenzy, so sometimes that can be used as a finish. It's only circumstantial because it's only really good when you have a big plant that, you know, will survive that turn and be fronted by a zombie, and, you know, yeah, and then you'll be able to get frenzy, so you'll be able to do some extra damage. Heroic health also, every once in a while this saves your life, but really it's one of the worst powers. You definitely don't want to start off with heroic health in your hand. Obviously you have no control over it. You know, sometimes the healing can really help you, but usually that's actually one of the worst powers in the game because it doesn't affect the field. You really want your powers to be affecting what's going on the field with the plants and the zombies and giving you an advantage that way. Moving right along, let's go to Rust Bolt. I'll show you the most recent Rust Bolt deck that we made. This actually just went onto YouTube today on the day that I'm recording this. So Rust Bolt is interesting. He has a lot of very big strengths and a lot of very big weaknesses. He's very good at taking out the big cards because one of his powers is cut down to size. He's very good at, you know, he also has like rocket science. He has pretty efficient big removal. He also has very efficient small removal. He's got Rolling Stone, he got Weed Spray, which is very good at taking the little guys. The weakness always of Rust Bolt is the 3 attack minions. You know, they're too small to be killed by rocket science and then too big to be killed by Rolling Stone. Sometimes a remedy for this is to be running the black hole in your deck, which will actually make those 3 attack minions have then 2 attack, and then you can Rolling Stone. It's really, again, you're trying to rely on a combination of 2 cards in order to take things out. So Rust Bolt is notoriously bad against 3 attack minions, which there are a lot of plants like that in the game, particularly flowers like Briar Rose, Power Flower, cards like that. Briar Rose, you know, Rust Bolt's very bad at dealing with them, and he has no tricks that really do damage. This particular build of Rust Bolt, there's a lot of different possibilities for Rust Bolt, a lot. This one's a ramp deck, as you can see. We're using the Nebula combined with the interdimensional zombie or with the Brain Venom to ramp up, and, you know, you really have a very strong late game. We have the marriage between Intergalactic Warlord and the plumber, you know, the not the plumber, he has a plumber in his head, but he is named Kitchen Sink Zombie. You know, very good late game ramping up. There's another deck with Rust Bolt, which is like Rusty. They call it like Rust to Win, which is a Rust Bolt trickster deck. Sometimes you can play a lot of tricks in your early game and then come in with tricksters for the late game to finish off, maybe combined with a Kitchen Sink Zombie or with Undying Pharaoh. Again, that's not as good as the other trickster decks that are out there because he doesn't have a way of dealing with a lot of minions. It's really hard for him to deal with, particularly minions with 3 attack. So he really does have sort of that weakness. Rust Bolt, you can also make zoo decks where you swarm a lot of little minions on the field. And, you know, and you kind of like grow them with either going viral or with your intergalactic warlord. It happens to be that one of Rust Bolt's weaknesses is not having any amphibious minions. I haven't really been going through the zombie heroes which have amphibious and which do not. Brainstorm does not, Rust Bolt does not, and Z-Mech does not, which is another weakness that Z-Mech has. He has, you know, no amphibious minions. It's you gotta always concentrate on the fact you're only gonna have a maximum of 4 minions on the field. You should definitely keep that in mind when you're making your little zoo swarmy decks, which is one reason why they don't work quite as well with Rust Bolt. Anyway, overall, I think Rust Bolt is a pretty good hero. His Shrink Ray is a good power. This does combine very well with Rolling Stone and Weed Spray. It also draws you a card, so that's great. Heroic Health is meh. Cut down to size is pretty meh. Because, again, it's very circumstantial, and then Rockwall is also very circumstantial. It's not a great card, so overall, his powers are very weak. Rust Bolt, which is one thing that really contributes to him not being like the strongest hero in the game. If his powers were a little better, I think Rust Bolt would be a lot better. Moving on to Brain Freeze. Brain Freeze, let's see here. Which one am I going to show you? This is a tempo Brain Freeze deck. I would say still the best decks for Brain Freeze really would be the regular control sneaky decks like I've shown you in the other sneaky heroes, where you're basically running your imps in the early game, your Pogo mixed up Gravedigger, and then you finish them off with your Plankwalker and your Shark. You can make an all sneaky class, you know, all sneaky deck, and then just, you know, supplement with your beastie cards as you see fit. You can run, you know, Trappers also in that deck as well. Fire Rooster, really great card. Happens to be this deck. This was an experiment we did. It's not as good. It is a tempo deck where you're trying to, you know, play a strong play on turn 1, follow up on turn 2, maybe grow with the Goat or with the Loudmouth on turn 3. It happens to be playing tempo as zombies is not nearly as good as playing tempo as plants. Since the zombies have to put their minions first and the plants react to it, usually the zombies you want to really emphasize in zombie strategies in terms of playing either gravestones or trick-based decks that will sort of give you the upper hand of being able to react to what the plants do, as opposed to just sticking a guy on the field every turn, and the plants will be able to choose what the matchups will be, place their plants in exactly the right places to give them an advantage. So really the best decks with Brain Freeze would look more like the other Brain Freeze deck. I might have another you know, control Brain Freeze deck, which I'll probably bring back. Maybe something that looks a little bit more like this. You can use Maniacal Laugh as a finisher instead of Plankwalker if you want. That'll be like the nice beastie card. A deck that looks like this is probably much better than, you know, much better than the one I showed you before. Basic, use your Shark, your Rooster, you control, you get them with the Pogo mix of Gravedigger, which is awesome, and you finish them off. Maniacal Laugh or Plankwalker or something like that. There is such thing as a pet deck with Brain Freeze. That is true. I haven't tried that enough. Again, pet decks also have a problem that in pet decks you're just playing minion after minion on the field, and the plants are able to react to you. They can remove a zombie when they like. They can front a zombie with whatever plant they can put in whichever lane they want, and you're powerless. That's one reason why pet decks and tempo decks and dancing decks are all really the worst types of zombie decks to make. Because you're playing just, you know, zombie after zombie on the field. Sports decks do have that problem too, but the sports decks have very, very strong cards like the, you know, that can't be removed easily the turn they're played, like the team mascot and obviously like the sports coach. Anyway, moving right along, Immorticia. Immorticia is a very interesting hero. A lot of really great strengths and a lot of weaknesses. So there's a few different ways to play Immorticia. I would say the simplest way is to make a trickster deck. It is really nice. Back in Season 1, we used to concentrate a lot on with Paparazzi and Teleport Vampire. I really have gone away from that. I feel like this deck went 10-0 when we did it in the stream, so this was an amazing, amazing deck. You basically control them with your Nibbles, your Beam-Me-Ups, and, you know, Tentacles really did add a lot to Immorticia. It's a really, Alien News is a really great card to just play right on turn 3 and remove something. It happens to be this environment, the Total Eclipse. Is good at, again, removing small cards, gives her a little bit more field clear potential against, you know, Shroom for 2 and stuff like that. And just come in after playing all these tricks with teleporting your Trickster or teleporting this card, and I did find Teleport is very good with Immorticia. Now, there are other Immorticia decks. You can do Immorticia Ramp, where you run your Nebulas and then your Brain Vendors and your interdimensional zombies. I will be doing that in the near future and really taking out the Tricksters from the equation, but this is probably the best Immorticia deck. Now, Immorticia, you gotta really watch out. Immorticia does have a few weaknesses. It has very good big removal, but not a lot of small removals. So you gotta really watch out for small cards. No real way of clearing the field with like a Weed Spray or a Chickening or a Firework Zombie. Or even like Fire Rooster. You do just have Nibble for small removal, which again only does 1 damage. You can only run 4 of these in your deck. Maybe this will help. But you know, against like say Bean decks or little small swarmy decks is really the biggest weakness of Immorticia because of her utter lack of field clear. So you gotta really watch out for that when you're playing Immorticia. Well, look at her powers. Now, I would say Immorticia's super, even though it's probably not the best power in the game. It's not one of the best, but this is very underrated. You know, this card actually got nerfed. It used to be 2-2, 2 attack, 2 health. It got nerfed to 2-1. This card is so much better than it looks. The fact you can summon a 2-1, as opposed to just playing a 2-1 on the board, you can play this during the trick stage. This will, again, imagine you had a card that just said, it's just a card in the zombie side. It said, do 2 damage to a plant, draw a card. So it's like Bungee Plumber, but it won't waste a card. It'll actually draw a card in your hand. I think if that card cost 2, it would have been too good. I really think that's like a 3-cost card. This arguably is even better than that. This will do 2 damage to a plant, draw a card. Sometimes you can buff this up so it will still give you that minion on the board, like, you know, combining this, let's say, with a lunchbox or something like that. Again, doing 2 damage, drawing a card, especially if you play this against a 0 attack plant like a walnut or something like that, is very, very good. Sometimes you can draw several cards with this. So I really do think that Witch is familiar. Again, it's not one of the best powers in the game, but it is good at chump blocking, like someone in the chat is saying. But it's just good at doing that little bit of damage and drawing you a card. It can be almost comparable to like Solar Flares super that again does a little damage and also will give you a little bit of an advantage to that game. Instead of giving you extra sun, it gives you a card advantage, which is very significant. Summoning is a great power. Again, this is one of the better powers in the game. It gives you sometimes it gives you a useless little 1-cost card. It used to be this will always give you a 2-drop, so it's become actually a lot worse. Because it usually is then now going to give you 1-cost cards instead of 2. Sometimes if it gives you a 2-cost card, it can be good. Evaporate is really one of the weaker powers in the game. It's very circumstantial. It only works on a damaged zombie, and it's not like Electric Boogaloo, who's the other hero that has Evaporate. Immorticia does not have any way of dealing damage with her tricks. You can't like combine this with Bungee Plumber or with Firework Zombie the way Boogaloo can. So Evaporate is really weak. And again, Acid Rain, very similar to Scorch on the plant side. It's one of the weaker powers in the game. I didn't actually go through Brain Freeze's powers, but I really I'm gonna maybe go back and just talk about a little bit about them because I skipped them. But I would say Morticia probably has one of the weaker lineups of powers in the game. It's one reason that makes her weak. I did actually not go through Brain Freeze's powers, so maybe I'll just go back and do that. I'm sorry I missed that over there, but again, Frozen Tundra, really the only good power he really has is Galvanize. This is one of the better ones in the game. Acid Rain is so circumstantial. Also his super again sometimes is really good. Free zombie decks are really not serious. They're kind of a joke. Sometimes if you have a lot of minions on the ground and they're matched up with plants, this will be very good, but otherwise not. Dolphinator is also unreliable. This is really one of the reasons why Brain Freeze and the Morticia are kind of like more on the weak side, because their powers are really subpar. They're not useless. They both have a very good power, but they are below average. Here comes Neptuna. Neptuna is a sneaky hero, which automatically makes her very, very good. And really combining that with the Hardy class, I have found that works very, very well. Having Rolling Stone on turn 1 and the cards like Intergalactic Warlord, again, most of the Neptuna decks are going to be, the good ones are going to be mostly sneaky. You can make a Sports Neptuna deck, which is good because you do have Pogo, which is a very strong card. Very good removal card. For Neptuna, of course, Neptuna's main removal is going to be Pogo. The Hardy class is no big removal. And Neptuna is a very, very solid hero. To the sneaky class is strong. The Hardy class, again, does complement it very well. And her powers are really, again, her superpower is one of the best ones in the game. Giving you a 3/2 amphibious for 1 and summoning it is it's better than, Dolphin Rider, let's say, that you play as a zombie. It's much better to play this card as a trick. Starting off with this on turn 1 is very good. The rest of her powers are all way below average. Dolphinado, again, is very unreliable. Encrypted is good with Pogo, but not with very many other cards. And Possessed is also very circumstantial. It's very interesting how Neptuna actually has weak powers and, really is combined the sneaky class, which is the strongest, let's say, zombie class in the game, with one of the weaker ones, the Hardy. I always just find a lot of success with Neptuna. I think the Hardy class and the sneaky class does have some little very secret, very special synergies, like combining imps and then growing them all with Intergalactic Warlord. Or in this deck, we actually try to grow your Space Cowboys by playing Intergalactic Warlord. They have a base damage of 4. Which is really, really good. Anyway, I really think Neptuna is one of the better heroes. You can make good Gravestone decks with Neptuna too, so if you don't have all the expensive cards like the Warlords and stuff, you can really just, turn 1, Headstone Carver, get some 2-cost Gravestones, 3-cost Gravestones, Pogo. If you have Mix-Up Gravedigger, that's good. And the late game of Neptuna is good. You really don't have to run, let's say, the Space Cowboys or all the cards in this deck. You can even take out a Rolling Stone and really add in some late game, like Shark and Plankwalker will probably actually improve this deck. I know there is one viewer who always shows me the deck that they made that really adds Plankwalker to that mix, and I think that's actually a good idea. And last, but certainly not least, when it comes to superpowers, I would say that Huge Giganticus probably has the best lineup of superpowers in this game, in my opinion. Obviously, it all depends on the circumstances, but this is what I'm going to show you. So again, first of all, he's a sneaky hero, so you can always just rely on the sneaky class to give you a good lineup of cards. You got your imps in the early game, your Pogo Mix-Up Gravedigger, your Shark, and your Plankwalker in the late game. His powers are amazing. I mean, this superpower right over here, Conjure an Environment. It draws you cards. It doesn't really cost you anything. That environment gets, buffed. It costs 1 less, so you get a lot of value out of it. And all the cards in your hand also cost 1 less. Which means if you start in your starting hand with Pogo Mix-Up Gravedigger and you get this early, The Pogo is going to cost 3, the Mix-Up Gravedigger is going to cost 4. Sometimes that can make your hand just so OP. A lot of times when you start off with Terraformer 10,000, you just win the game if you have a decent hand besides for that. Also, the rest of his cards are just really powerful. I mean, playing this is a 1 cost, 2 attack, 3 health Bullseye, which is like a 3 cost. I mean, you know, this I think would be a little, maybe it would cost 2, this card. Also, when it's an environment, it grows. I mean, I would say this is at least a 2.5 cost card, probably a 3 cost card. And you're just playing on the field. You can play it on 1. It gives you such a big advantage. Ice Moon, I would say after that, is really good. It does freeze a guy. Again, this isn't the greatest. It is an environment, so it can take out one of your opponent's environments. It also gives you Strike Through and Freeze, so it can really keep one of your zombies on the field. A strong zombie, very good to play this on a lane that already has a strong zombie in it, and that strong zombie will also be able to hit your opponent's face with the strike through. Teleportation station is sometimes good. These little teleports are usually going to be more useful. When you get a teleport, of course, it means you can play a zombie as a trick this turn and draw a card. Very often drawing the cards is more important, but again, it is an environment and it can give you extra card draw, and sometimes those teleports really come in handy. I really do enjoy playing Huge Giganticus. He has a lot of very similar decks to Super Brains, which is your typical either your ramp deck with the Nebulas, or your control deck with the Pogo Mix-Up Gravedigger, or your mill deck if you're running a lot of bounce and a lot of regifters. The other deck that's actually really specific to this hero, and that's the one I'm showing you right over here, the environmentally friendly deck. And it works so well because really 3 out of 4 of your powers give you environments, and that will give you a huge advantage. Really, with Huge Giganticus is the only hero that this card over here, the Ice Pirate, is actually good. Usually you're not going to end up having an environment on the field on turn 1. Usually the only one you'll have, let's say, is going to be the Graveyard with the Sneaky class, but this one you have so likely to be able to play an environment on turn 1. So you're really able to then put a 3/1 on the board that freezes, and that really gives you a lot of potential. I really do like this deck. You can check it out. It is on YouTube. I really do enjoy playing Huge Giganticus a lot. He's always full of surprises, and he really takes advantage of the environment strategy. Obviously, looking at his powers, they all have to do something with environments. Takes care of that part of the game better than any hero, period. And he just really has a good lineup of cards. He's arguably, again, the 2 strongest classes. For those of you who do like running trickster decks with Super Brains, I would totally discourage you from trying it with Huge Giganticus. I'm probably never going to even try that, just because his superpowers are 3 out of 4 of them, as you can see, are either a minion or an environment. These will not charge the trickster. Only the Terraformer, which is a trick, will be able to make the trickster cost 1 less if the trickster's in your hand when you play it. So combined with that and him just being 2 classes that have really weak small tricks. I guess, Cryo Brain's a thing, but teleport, but, really the 1 cost tricks are really not that good. He doesn't have any good, like, plumbers or wraths or anything like that. I would stay away from tricksters, keep with the sneaky sort of theme, and go with your Pogo Mix-Up Gravediggers, or with these environment decks. I think are really good. Anyway, guys, that is a review of all the heroes and their superpowers. I hope that this helped you get a little bit of an idea of what sort of decks to build with the zombie heroes, what to really watch out for in terms of your opponents with the zombies or the plants heroes. Really, what are the weaknesses of each class, and a little bit about the powers, who has the good powers, and how to use them. Anyway, I hope that you enjoy. This is Fry.